How much did the Hexatrek cost me to hike? Let's go through all the numbers and find out. So for some context, the Hexatrek is a relatively new long distance path in France and it's just over 3,000 kilometers long. And I hiked it in the summer of 2023 and it took me 118 days to complete. So I've added up all of my costs from this through hike. I haven't added the gear that I purchased before the trail, but I have added the gear that I purchased on the trail. So let's get into the video and let's get into the numbers. So first off, I had a few costs before I even stepped foot on the trail. I had to get a tourist visa for France because it was going to take me longer than 3 months. I had to get myself some travel insurance and I had to get myself the Hexatrek, official Hexatrek app, which had all the maps for navigation on it. And this added up to £205. And I did have some travel costs, but I've put that into my travel category. And next up we have accommodation, as the rain starts pouring here on a nice rainy day in the UK. So accommodation, I tried to wild camp as much as possible along the trail to keep my costs low, and I had 89 nights where I wild camp along the trail, and I had 28 nights of paid accommodation. So these ranged from cheap campsites, cheap hostels, couple apartments that I found on booking.com, mountain refuges. I think I paid for one hotel and some guest houses, and this all totaled up to £654. So I tried to keep these costs quite low. I wild camped as much as possible and I only needed to get accommodation for power reasons really, and that was just to charge up my power bank. And I think £654 for 4 months of hiking for accommodation is not too bad at all. Next category is food. This was by far the biggest expense on the Hexatrek, and I didn't have a stove, so I didn't cook any food on the trail. I bought all my food from supermarkets, and the total I spent on food in supermarkets was £1,097. I also bought some food from restaurants and takeaway pizzas, and I bought ice creams along the way, and all this I've put in a category called eating out, and that just totals £300. So I didn't eat in the restaurants very much, it was only a few times, and I don't really enjoy eating in restaurants on a through hike. I like sitting out in the wild and eating my food. Next up we have the gear category, and as mentioned at the start of this video, this is just the gear that I purchased on the trail, not purchased before the hike itself. So this totaled up to £286, and this was some more trail shoes, lots of socks. I had a lot of socks that got a lot of holes in as I was hiking along, so I had to buy loads more socks, and I had to buy a headlight. I bought some gloves for when I was high up in the mountains, and just all those little pieces of gear. That totaled up to £286. I was quite lucky that my tent lasted and all the more expensive items lasted, so I didn't have to replace anything too expensive. So there was a bit of travel to pay for, and this included getting to the start of the trail. It included getting home again from the end of the trail back to the UK, and there was a little bit of travel whilst I was on the trail. One of these was I had to get a ferry across Lake Geneva at the end of stage 1, and I got a few buses just to get myself to supermarkets to resupply, and this all totaled up to £284. So this last category I've called miscellaneous, and this is all the stuff that don't really fall into the other categories, and they include things like renting a canoe for the day, as I went down an alternate path of the Hexatrek. I got a haircut, I sent postcards, I bought like sun cream and toothpaste and all those kind of little bits and bobs, and that totals up to £212. And the last cost was a mobile phone. I had a O2 SIM bundle which was £15 a month, and that gave me 25 gigabytes for all of the EU, which was more than enough data. So that was £60 for the duration of the hike. Before we get into the grand total for this hike, just for transparency reasons, I didn't have any costs at home in the UK. So I didn't have any rent, or I don't have a flat or a house, and I declared my car off the road, so I had no car tax or anything like that. So I had no costs at home in the UK, so all these costs were just what the hike cost me for 4 months, basically just living along the trail, which is what I love about through hiking. And the grand total for this hike was £3,098. So this calculates at just over £26 a day that this hike cost me for 4 months of hiking along the Hexatrek in France. And I didn't really have a budget when I started this hike. I just tried to keep my costs really low as much as I could, and I'm really happy with how it turned out. I could have done it a tiny little bit cheaper, but I feel like this amount is a budget amount. So I hope you've enjoyed this little insight of how much the Hexatrek cost me to hike, and I hope it helps you when you're planning your hike as well. And if you have any questions about my costs of the Hexatrek or about the Hexatrek in general, just let me know in the comments. I'll be happy to answer your questions. And if you're interested in seeing a little bit more from the trail, I have this playlist here. I did a load of vlogs of me hiking the Hexatrek, so you can check that out if you want to see a bit more of the trail. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.